Hi guys, Angelfish Keeper here, and this video is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to be telling you the importance that alkalinity plays in a marine tank when you're dosing with calcium and magnesium. So normally when you're setting up a reef tank, or if you have a reef tank already or you're thinking of setting one up, you've probably heard of dosing. And what dosing is, it's basically adding natural reef elements that are found in seawater, and the main three are calcium, magnesium and alkalinity, but there's others like iodine, strontium and just other general trace elements. So the calcium basically builds the skeleton of hard corals like trachyphyllias, torch corals, all those that kind of have a hard bony skeleton to them. You know, like your hystrix and your senatoporas, your montiporas, all those kind of corals. And your alkalinity and magnesium, they're also absorbed by soft corals and your hard corals. Calcium is also absorbed by soft corals, but most of the time when you've just got soft corals like I have, you don't actually need to do any dosing, you know, because your water change will basically put the trace elements back in that they've absorbed. Because the salt that I use is Red Sea's Coral Pro salt, and you can see they're the levels, and it has slightly more elevated levels, as also you can see if you've got SPS, that's the calcium content. And that's for your salinity to go to 1.026. But obviously, if you've got your hard corals, the salt's not really going to cut it on its own. You will need the additional trace elements. So I've got the calcium, alkalinity and magnesium. But basically what you've probably seen is, on a reef tank, you might have seen like a sort of white, sort of like a white crust on the upper levels of your tank. And what that is calcium carbonate. And what calcium carbonate is, it's when the calcium and magnesium actually fuse together and become its own element. But when it does that, it can't be used by the coral at that point. The coral can't consume it. So what the alkalinity does is, the alkalinity actually gets in between the two and actually stops them from fusing. So it's really important that you keep on top of all three of your elements, especially with your alkalinity. If you keep on top of that, because obviously once it turns into calcium carbonate, your calcium and your magnesium is going to drop. And you know, if you've got a SPS reef, stability is key. I mean, stability is key for all types of saltwater tanks, but especially when you're adding your coral. So keep on top of your alkalinity, and that'll stop your calcium and magnesium from becoming calcium carbonate, and it'll stop it, and it'll keep it ready for the coral to be constantly used, because by the time it does that, the coral can't consume it. They're not foods for coral, you know, you still have to feed your coral on top of that. They are just the trace elements that are going to help the coral grow, because inside coral is microscopic algae, which is actually what gives the coral pigment and stuff like that. You've probably heard of coral bleaching in hard corals, and that is actually the coral ejecting its algae cells. It ejects the algae, and that basically causes the coral to lose its colour. It can happen if your tank's too warm, or it's, you know, there's something going wrong with the tank. You know, they can normally bounce back as long as they haven't been bleached for ages. You know, a couple of days is usually okay. Any longer than a week, you're going to kind of struggle to bring them back. You might have to chop that part of the coral off. Obviously soft corals you don't worry about them bleaching, because they haven't got anything to them. They're not a skeleton, they just kind of dissolve into nothing. So I would recommend starting off with softies and then going into easier hard corals like your frog spawns, your torches, like your Euphilia type hard corals to start off with, candy canes, Duncans, that kind of thing, before moving into like Trichophilias, Acropora, you know, all the things that you're going to need to be spot on with your dosing. I would recommend getting an automatic doser if you've got those types of coral, because manual dosing, although you're being consistent, it's not as stable, you know, because you could miss a day, you know, whereas an automatic doser, you're not going to miss at all. It's going to be on the dot when you want it to dose, you know, whereas if you're manually dosing like me, you might get busy, you know, you might not be able to dose that day. So obviously I use them 3 there, and I also use, you can just see it through there, the all elements, and that does have calcium and magnesium in, but it has all the other trace elements, the iodine, the strontium, and your standard trace elements as well, which your coral need. And that is your coral food. That's what you feed the coral. I also feed marine snow, which is a good one. That's also by Red Sea, and that's kind of that's your amino acids and your carbohydrates, which are really important for your coral. And that's a daily feeding. You've got to make sure you feed that daily and keep it refrigerated. But yes, make sure when you're dosing you're keeping on top of that alkalinity, because once your calcium and magnesium fuse together, it's useless and it can't be used by the coral. So yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you've learned something from the video. If so, give it a like. If I've missed anything, just drop it in the comments, because I probably have. But yeah, please like, comment and subscribe if you haven't already. Bye.